Yeah. Hey everyone, welcome to Inference Swap, inferenceswap.com. Today is another episode of Table Talk. I'm your host, John Pappas. I am so excited to be here with you. Still jamming to this tune called Shotgun on from Junction 715. Yeah. How's everyone doing today? It is extremely different out there today. Yesterday, the day before, in the 70s, 75 degrees, and today, here we are, and it is like 45 degrees, and it is just windy and cold. It couldn't be further from just the last couple days, and so I find myself with a sweatshirt on, cooped up and ready to roll. Hey, I'm really excited about being here. If you haven't subscribed to us, go to YouTube and look up Inference Swap. And subscribe, and definitely go to inferenceswap.com and subscribe to our podcast. Inference Swap is a show, is a website with many different shows, and we're doing video now, and I hope you'll enjoy it. Today, we're going to do something a little different on Table Talk. We are going to hit up some weird news, we're going to hit up some headlines, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the Bible. So let's just jump right into it. So excited for you to be here today. How is everybody holding up with the entire whole thing of just being inside? It's beautiful in some aspects, and in other aspects, it's hard to be around the same people all the time and not get annoyed and not get frustrated and not pick on people and not do all these things. But I'm so happy and blessed to be with a loving family, and everybody seems to be keeping busy. The e-learning thing is going pretty darn good for my son, EZP. I'm drinking lots of great coffee. Right now we're drinking Dunkin' Donuts French Vanilla. And so I recommend that with a little splash of, French, was it vanilla cream? Yeah. Can't get any better than that, right? On this little cold day. Well, let's jump right into weird news today. We've got some different things happening, and I just thought it would be sort of fun to go and get into it. Check out this. Today, and if you can't see this, please go to the website and look at it on YouTube, because we're going live, and I'll post it in inferenceswap.com, but an Inference Swap Facebook group. But today, because we're having pictures, that's what I'm saying, and I'm going to show some video also today. But today, we have Hulk Hogan posting on his Facebook that God has taken away everything we worship. In a Facebook post on Monday, Hogan sort of featured himself praying against a wall in unison with a caption of biblical report of proportions, recalling the plagues of Egypt that actually were designed to humiliate pagan deities. So Hogan said that our modern gods, from sports to celebrity to money, have been taken away by us by this pandemic. Here's what he says: in 3 short months, just like he did with the plagues of Egypt, God has taken away everything we worship. God said, you want to worship athletes? I'll shut down the stadiums. You want to worship musicians? I will shut down civic centers. You want to worship actors? I'll shut down theaters. You want to worship money? I'll shut down the economy and collapse the stock market. You don't want to go to church and worship me? I will make it where you can't go to church. Then he quoted the scripture, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sin and will heal their land. Concluding the post, Hogan said people should take this time of isolation for what truly, truly matters. Wow. The Hulk, not only a wrestler in the WWE or whatever that is, he's wrestling with the rest of the world with them kind of words, is he not? And let me tell you, I think he's got something there. I think many people right now are literally trying to pray about getting back to the things that we once thought were important. And I see this in the religious community specifically. We really want to get back to the way things were. But what if God is giving us a chance to reset, to be us, so that we would be the people He actually called us to be, and we would focus on things that He actually called us to do? I think Hulk Hogan has, he's on the right track. You know what I'm saying? It's not that you can't be a wrestler. It's that we worship these things and we want to identify with these things other than God. And so God doesn't become sovereign in our life. We make other things sovereign. So I'm going to give kudos to a big thumbs up to old Hulk Hogan, because I think he's really sort of telling the truth here when it comes to the reality of where we are in America. If God is who He says He is, why would not spiritual things matter as much as the physical reality is us being inside all the time? You know what I'm saying? So let's give Him kudos for even talking up such stuff. Our next story, this is our weird story. This is sort of funny. Today, with all this toilet paper frenzy, and I think I got a theme going here in weird news today with toilet paper, but a pregnant mother from Springfield, Missouri was rushed to grab toilet paper for her family in the midst of all the chaos, when we were told that in the next 2 weeks we need to be staying inside and isolated and quarantined with each other. In the midst of this, she ran to Walmart as fast as she could, and the next thing you know, she's by the paper aisle, as you can see in the pictures up here, and where they stacked up all the toilet paper, she was making her way through the commotion, and her water broke. And her water broke, and in the midst of all this chaos, she began to have a baby. Well, luckily for her, and I think for the people that really needed toilet paper, because that water probably got on the toilet paper, you know what I'm saying? Anyway, there was a nurse that just happened to be there on the scene, and they began to assist the mother. And the toilet paper picture you see is this big toilet paper wall. Imagine stacking a toilet paper wall is as tall as me, which is about 6 feet high. They stacked up toilet paper around the woman until the firefighters arrived on the scene, and they delivered the baby right there and then. Is that not crazy? And guess what? In honor of this baby being birthed at Walmart, guess what they named him? Can you guess? That's right, Scott. Scott. Get it? Scott. There's a picture. Scott, yes. So, lots of toilet paper controversy out there, but we know that it's all in good fun there. But that's a true story that happened in Springfield, Missouri. So, how about this? A Florida man was reported today as poking fun at this frenzy, the toilet paper frenzy that has sort of gripped this nation. His name's Donald Ryan, and WFLA News is reporting that he's the owner of an arts and crafts store, and he decided to hang this big, huge replica of a toilet paper roll in his front yard, and he used it as a way to promote his business by painting the name of his business on this big replica on the pieces of paper that you could pull out of the replica. And if you can see the picture behind me, this thing's huge, and it's swinging in between these two big trees, and you can come down there and grab this big piece of toilet paper, and it has his business information on it, which is sort of, I'm going to say, genius. And it sort of comes as a fresh reminder that this toilet paper supplies are out there. People are ravishing all of this stuff in the midst of this pandemic. Even yesterday, my wife and I, even though we weren't supposed to, we ran over to the Strachan Van Til's, which is our grocery store, and there was still no toilet paper in there, and you're only still allowed to buy one package. So it's a little crazy out there, but I just thought that was sort of funny. The guy used the toilet paper thing as a way to just to be a little creative and promote his business. Well, how about this next story coming out of Weird News? I just thought this was weird. Since toilet paper seems to be one of the big stories Apparently, the Japanese toilets that are out there in Japan are now a marvel of technological innovation. They have integrated bidets, which squirt water to clean our bottom parts. They have dryers and heated seats. They use water efficiently. They clean themselves and deodorize the air so the bathroom actually smells good. They have a little bit of white noise so you can fill your stall with the sound of rain or relaxation and privacy. Some have built-in night lights and music players. It's all customizable by control, by electronic buttons, and on a panel next to your seat. So in Japan, high-tech toilets, I guess, are everywhere. They're saying that 80% of homes and businesses have them, whereas in comparison to U.S. toilets, we have been called by them bedpans with drains. The Japan company Toto has found emerging success, I guess, economically in the toiletry market in that part of the country, where in the U.S. Toto makes a thing called the washlet. Got a picture of it right here. Let me throw it up there. This washlet is built, and it's mainly found in fancy hotels. But other than that, I think they're pretty much right on. We are just using bedpans with drains. But they say the biggest barrier to the toilet revolution is probably not the culture, but the distance mores, which means that the Japanese highly prioritize bathing and hygiene and cleanliness. I guess it's common in Japan to see people wearing masks to prevent spreading germs. When you go to dinner there, you often are given hot, moist towels. We know this when we go to these Japanese restaurants out here. Wipes so that we can clean our hands before we eat. The streets and subways, I guess, are spotless, and hand sanitizing dispensers are everywhere. The only downside, and guess what the downside is to these technological innovations out of Japan for toiletry, they are between $2,000 to $5,000 for a toilet. And the premium sets go up to $15,000. And this is compared to a base toilet that's around $45 to $90 here in the US. So I guess what America is really saying is that we really don't give a crap. We really don't give a crap, if you get what I'm saying. So that is a little bit of our I guess weird news, if you will, and we're going to switch over to the headlines for today. And coming out of headline today, how many know? So I only picked 3 or 4. I don't know what I'm going to do today. But did you know that I live by Chicago? And there's a growing concern among Republicans and Americans and middle-centered Democrats that the left is trying to use the crisis that we're in for a power struggle, and the imposition of power on people is something that really needs to be monitored, and people need to be held accountable. We got to remember that these public servants aren't getting these positions in order to be held in high esteem and for them to have power grabs, but for the purposes of serving their communities and the people they represent. Well, there's a growing concern, I guess, over the last, few weeks, as the imposition of the quarantine is put on all of us, that leaders themselves aren't leading by example. They aren't living up to the rules they're making us live up to, and therefore what's happening is they are sort of hypocritical, and they're actually enforcing laws on others but not living up to those standards themselves. Well, this so happened to happen this week in Chicago, where the mayor, and I'm forgetting her name, I'm going to look it up here, the mayor of Chicago, let me look that up, Mayor of Chicago, because I don't really pay attention that much to Chicago politics. specifically because it's just so crazy over there, man. Well, Chicago's a beautiful city. There's a lot of bad policy going on over there. There's a lot of bad just things happening in that part of the world out there. It can be beautiful, but can it be devastating over there? So while I look up, here's the mayor. I can't find her name, and I'm having a little bit of internet trouble. Oh, it's Mayor Laura Lightfoot. There it is. So Mayor Lori Lightfoot has put a quarantine on everybody in her city, throwing on commercials, even like shooting a basketball and like, saying, if I make this, you got to stay in. If I don't, trying to be cute about it. But her actions in and of themselves aren't doing what she's asking other people to do. So let's just see man, I can't talk today. Let's just see when the media holds her accountable, how she reacts. Here we go.
Matt Mooney says his family just wanted some.
Oh.
So I think
Really? So I'm throwing a bunch of stuff up.
I'm the public face of this city. I'm on national media, and I'm out in the public eye. And I'm a person who I take my personal hygiene very seriously. As I said, I felt like I needed to have a haircut. I'm not able to do that myself, and so I got a haircut. You want to talk more about that?
Wow. Got anything else you want to say? Any more questions you want to ask? You see what I'm saying? So what we're seeing is sort of this power grab by people that think they're better than the everyday normal people because they hold position. And that is the exact opposite of what the Bible is asking us to do. This is sort of my problem in American church as well, because while many of these guys are great people, is institutionally they get into hierarchies and they end up not serving the people, but the people end up serving the machine themselves. And here is another example of a power grab where she's making all these commercials and holding people accountable to the laws of not going out in public, not going to the hair salons, not getting a haircut. We can't do it, but she can. Because why? Because, well, dang it, she's got to be in on TV, and she's a public servant, quote. And so she doesn't have to be held to the same standards as the rest of us. Do you have an issue with that? I do. If we have to all stay in, I'm a little scruffy today, and got the hair the way I normally wear. And I'm sure you're going through the same thing. I think I'm seeing my mom's hair color for the first time in my entire life. I'm seeing her first natural hair color. I'm sure the wives out there, the housewives out there, and the many wives who don't have access to go get hair color because there's more important things to grab right now, would love to be able to go to the beauty shop, right? But these people seem to impose the law but not keep them themselves. Well, you might be saying, oh, John, you're just overreacting. Well, to this. Fox, I think it's Fox 10 here, reports a guy that gets arrested for going to a public park just with his kid and with his wife and plays some t-ball. And what's crazy about this is they get arrested, or he gets arrested in front of his 6-year-old daughter. So let's take a look at this report.
Matt Mooney says his family just wanted some fresh air, so they went to an open space to play some t-ball, never guessing it would land him in the back of a police cruiser. Now he wants a public apology.
Brighton police are apparently arresting a dad for throwing a ball to his daughter.
It was a former city council member who could not believe what he was recording.
In a park of about, 30, 40 acres. But apparently that is not allowed by Brighton.
Well, if you don't give us your information, we're going to put you in handcuffs in front of your 6-year-old daughter.
Matt Mooney is the 33-year-old dad who assured his daughter they were doing nothing wrong when police approached and told them they were violating the state's social distancing guideline.
She's like, Daddy, I don't want you to get arrested. And at this point, I'm thinking, there's no way they're going to arrest me. There's no way. This is insane. And, so I'm telling her, I'm like, don't worry, Daddy's not going to get arrested. I've done nothing wrong. Don't worry about it. And then they arrest me.
The sign at Donaldson Park says closed, but in smaller print says in groups of no more than 4 persons, parks remain open for walking, hiking, biking, running, in similar activities. Matt was just there with his wife and 6-year-old. He says it was the officers who were violating social distancing guidelines.
During this whole contact, none of the officers had masks on, none of them had gloves on, and they're in my face, handcuffing me, they're touching me.
Wow. Now, don't you think with all the things that are going on right now that they have more to do with their time than just get some guy who's playing catch with his kid or playing t-ball with his kid? But this is what we're talking about. We think that these people are serving us when in fact they end up enforcing laws on other. Why they themselves aren't even sitting up to it, man. Now, I have a problem with that. I don't know how you guys feel, but for that poor guy to get arrested and cuffed in front of his family. And by the way, I love the police, man. I'm grateful for the police, but I really do believe that we have to keep these people accountable, or we need to figure a way to be able to keep our economy going and allow people out of their houses that are not sick. And I know that's a controversial topic because, I do have a sort of a fear coming out of this quarantine a little earlier. But for the cops to by law and not even follow the rules that were posted at the park is just insane. So you see that we have to keep these people accountable. You know what I'm saying? And we just see that there's so much weird information out there, that there's so much manipulation, that we really can't trust the government like we thought we could. And that's not saying I think President Trump is doing a fantastic job. I think he's giving us the information we need, and he's trying to stay positive with that information. However, I do think you have to know your sources and where you're getting this information around. Now, here is the press secretary. Here's one of the doctors out of the White House yesterday talking about how there seems to be a leftist agenda to how they deal with mortality and how they're counting deaths and how they're keeping the White House accountable. And it's really a little scary, but let's take a look at this.
So I think in this country, we've taken a very liberal approach to mortality. And I think the reporting here has been pretty straightforward over the last 5 to 6 weeks. Prior to that, when there wasn't testing in January and February, that's a very different situation and unknown. There are other countries that if you had a pre-existing condition, and let's say the virus caused you to go to the ICU and then have a heart or kidney problem, some countries are recording that as a heart issue or a kidney issue and not a COVID-19 death. Right now, we're still recording it, and the great thing about having forms that come in and a form that has the ability to mark it as COVID-19 infection, the intent is right now that if someone dies with COVID-19, we are counting that as a COVID-19 death.
All right. So what do you think of that? They're basically saying that we're not counting correctly, and therefore the numbers are getting skewed. And I think Deborah Birx, I think is her name, is really trying to put into perspective that we need great statistics, that we need to be honest about not only the virus, but the effects of the virus and how that counts towards our statistics for death or people that get this. So they're not counting in some countries if somebody dies of complications caused by coronavirus. They're not counting it as coronavirus, they're counting it as whatever the complication is. And so we also see that to a degree, they want to push the narrative in the media that the statistics are worse than they are. And we're getting reports today out of New York that while the death count is sort of going up, the cases themselves are going down. Well, that's sort of what the White House has been saying. So we have to be careful of how we interpret these statistics and how we look at the COVID problem right now. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there that causes people to panic, and I think actually causes the, for example, like the White House, not to get the statistics for their models or these physicians, and that sort of skews how we go about predicting the future of what could happen when we'll of what we're doing, for example, quarantine, and how we go about getting out of this quarantine. So it's a little bit crazy out there right now. It's on another issue. There's 6.6 million new people that just claimed unemployment. So unemployment claims, this is just coming in hot off the press, I'm looking at it right now, are now at 16,780,000 claims. Is 16,780,000 claims. So if you're listening to this show and you're working, you should feel blessed, because there's a lot of people, and the recession is inevitable, I think, if we don't get back to work and get this economy moving. And there's a big danger on the other side of this too. And this is what I was talking about earlier, is we have joblessness, we have the government trying to make up for the money that everybody's losing. Everybody's not panicked right now because they've been promised this money. I myself haven't received any of this money, and neither has my wife. But we keep hoping these claims will go through. Who even knows what the backlog is on unemployment? We filed probably 3 weeks ago and still have saw nothing. We haven't even, things are still pending, let alone getting the finances that were promised, and that's a little crazy. But to go back to this idea that I guess after, on the other side of this, I think a lot about that. I don't know about how you guys, how we're going to do on the other side of this. And the question is, can we really get back to everyday normal life? Well, reports out of NPR are asking the question, even if things get better all of a sudden, what would happen if we all just go back to what was normal? And that's what I've been thinking a lot about too, because the virus is now in thousands, if not hundreds of locations around the world. There's infectious disease doctors that are saying that they don't believe that this virus is finished with exploring the human, I don't know, not condition, but the humanity itself. In other words, we're not putting it, without a vaccine, we're not putting it to death, this virus. It's not like the plague, you know what I'm saying? Like, what we're seeing is this virus is expanding, and it's still in what I think they reported yesterday, 6 continents, where it's still expanding, it's still getting bigger. And so when we release everybody back out, we're gonna have to, because we can't sustain everybody sitting at home. But we're talking about getting back there amongst billions of people. And is it inevitable that this virus will flare up again once people start going back to work, once they start getting back into normal activities, once they get back into groups? When we're sitting next to each other, when we're at church and somebody sneezes, or when we're in the nursery and a kid coughs, the best protection we could possibly come up with is some kind of vaccine. And what we're finding is we don't have that yet, and we don't know how quick that's going to be. So I don't think it's smart yet to get back to normalcy. I think we're going to have to do it conditionally. And this goes back to the power thing that we sort of started in this segment. Could this drive us to have the government start giving us unified income or equal income? Could this move us from capitalism to what the left has always wanted in the first place? So these are the things we have to be aware of. But I mean, these are complicated problems, right? Like I could sit here and get on my political high horse, but the reality is where we're living is not necessarily the best times right now. And what I mean by that is like, how do we go about getting back to the normalcy that we were in without getting everybody reinfected or infected? I'm sorry, you can't get reinfected, but the people that don't have it infected, and it causes this big second wave. Well, I don't know. But I know that these are our headlines, and I know that we're going to have to figure something out, and we need to be praying for a vaccine. You know what I'm saying? Well, that's today's headlines. That's today's weird news. We are going to take a station break and come right back. And we're going to, on the other side of this, we're going to do some Bible. So I'll talk to you in a second. Back in a second. Well, welcome back, everyone. My name is John Pappas, and welcome back to Table Talk. On this side of the station ID, we're going to talk about Easter today. If you don't know, go to inferenceswamp.com and subscribe right now, and you get all these different kinds of shows, including Table Talk. Now, Table Talk, what we've done with it is sort of expanded it because we're in quarantine, and maybe you're just sitting around and you want to listen to something. Well, why not my squeaky, edgy voice, right? Well, I hope you enjoyed the other segment of headline news along with weird news. Just something fun to do. But on this side, this is about the side that we really started Table Talk about, which is about discipleship and God's mission. But because it's Easter, I wanted to get a little more apologetic with it and talk about how do we move from doubt to faith by looking at Easter, and is it something that we can actually increase our faith in Jesus on the other side of the cross? In other words, through the resurrection, can we actually move from doubt to faith? And I think we can. Well, how do we do that? This is a great question, and this is what we're going to hit today. Today, we are going to talk about doubting Thomas and the relationship of doubting Thomas and Jesus. And if you can see this, the picture behind me, we have a picture of Thomas putting his finger in the wound of Jesus, the glorified wound of Christ. And so how can we, what are one of the ways that we can move from doubt and just like, do I really believe this kind of thing, into faith? Well, some of it is just looking at the evidence, right? And we're going to do that today. So let me start with this. We're going to read a little bit this story out of John 21 through 24, and I'm going to put that up behind me, and we're going to look at the scripture itself and then see what it says and what it's saying to us and how we can move from doubt to faith, if that makes any kind of sense. It looks like I put the headlines behind me. We don't need that, right? This is a different kind of headline. Here's the headline for today: the resurrection is true. All right, here it is. Now, this is John 20:24, and we're going to go to maybe 27. It says, "Now Thomas, one of the 12, called the twin, was not with them when Jesus came." Now, what does that mean? Not with them. Jesus had died, and he had rose from the dead. He had already appeared to the disciples and some of the women. And then he left them again. And so now we're picking up from there where it says, "Now Thomas, one of the 12, called the twin, was not with them when Jesus had come." So the other disciples came to Thomas and they're like, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, he like interrupts them. He's like, can you imagine? Like, they've seen the Lord. They want to tell their buddy that they have been with Jesus from the beginning. He's like, unless I see the hands and the mark of the nails that go through his hand, unless I place my finger in his side, I will never believe. Well, why is that? Well, it's the same reason many of us don't believe. The trauma. There's probably things in our life that have come up that have been hard, that have been traumatic, that make us question everything. Earlier in the news today, we talked about how Hulk Hogan looks out there and he sees this as God trying to reset things one more time. And it's been traumatic because we put our faith in things that we want rather than the reality of God. And this is definitely one of those things for Thomas. Thomas is experiencing deep, deep wounds. What do I mean by that? He left everything to go follow Jesus. He believed Jesus was the Messiah, but he didn't understand what Jesus meant by being the Messiah. And that was that he would die and raise again. Jesus kept telling him this, telling them this, telling them this. If you read the Gospels, he keeps telling them this. And they don't believe him. They don't understand it because Messiahs aren't supposed to die, right? But Jesus comes in a whole different light and does this whole different thing. And so all of his hopes and dreams and the traumatic experience from those things being shattered are right there in the heat of the moment. And so he looks at these guys and he's like, you guys are crazy. I ain't believing that kind of nonsense. I watched him die. And I watched the spear go into his side. I watched them pull out his beard. I watched them put nails, I'm talking nails through his hand and feet. I watched them take a crown of thorns and stick them through his eyebrows and pierce his eyes. I watched the wounds on his back, the stripes of where they pulled off chunks of meat off of his back. I watched it, and then I watched him die. I'm not going through that again. Many of us have trauma in our life that we've gone through where we question God, and we're like, it's like when somebody we love dies, and somebody comes, well, hey, there's some new medicine out there in Africa. All we have to do is get your father or your grandpa there, and he might live. And everybody's like, I don't want to go through that again. It's too much. It's too much. That's where I sort of think we have basically Thomas right now. It's just too much. And so what we find right here is Thomas is just dramatic. He's traumatized. The Savior is not a savior to him. He's just this dead guy, right? That's what he's saying. He's just this dead guy. Well, that's just crazy, but that's what he's seeing right now, and he doesn't know what to believe. He doesn't know where he's at with this, and much like me and you when we hit trauma, when we hit things that we just don't understand, and we go, where is God? Where is God? I just don't know. So, on the other side, let's keep reading. So he says, unless I put my fingers in his hands and place my hand on his side, I'm not going to believe, right? Now, here's where the tide turns. 8 days later, not 7, a week and 1 day later, his disciples were inside again. Thomas was with them. So Thomas is still hanging out with his buddies. He's hearing for a week that Jesus is alive, and he ain't buying it. He ain't having anything. They probably aren't even talking about it because I'm done with that, right? And they're in this locked room, and here's what happens. Jesus appears to them, and he says, peace be with you. And then he says, and he looks to Thomas, and he says, Thomas, put your fingers here and see my hands, and put your hand and place it on my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe. And Thomas looked up at him and said, my Lord and my God. And Jesus said to him, have you believed because you've seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen me yet and have believed, or have not seen and believed. So what are some of the point? What is the point I want to make today out of this? Well, there's a lot of things that could be said here, but this is what I want you to hear. In order for us to move from doubt to faith, what we have to understand is that we have to be able to take the eyewitness account into our heart, despite the trauma it causes us. Are you feeling that? What am I saying? Listen, how much history do you believe? Do you believe Pearl Harbor happened? Do you believe that George Washington was real, that Abraham Lincoln was real? How about Socrates? I mean, we could go way back. How about, King Herod? Do you believe that was real? Do you believe that the Roman emperors were real? Of course you do. Why? Because they had eyewitness accounts. And we have eyewitness accounts that we can historically verify, and we can verify if it's legend, if it's not legend, and it's true. Well, scholarship in biblical New Testament has taken off so much in the last 50 years, okay, that we know that the historical account of the Gospels are real. There is no better plausible explanation for the resurrection than the one we're getting. Now, why am I telling you that? Because often when it comes to the Bible, we're not taking the eyewitness accounts into account. And we find ourselves, think about this, in the exact same predicament as Thomas, or Thomas finds himself in the same predicament that we do. In other words, for 8 days, he sat there not believing that Jesus has risen from the dead, despite the disciples telling him, Peter, Andrew, John, Matthew, all going, listen, I'm telling you, Jesus is alive. What about Mary and her friends that found Jesus with the tomb empty? They all ran to the disciples and told them, and then Jesus appeared to them, right? And we have that history too. But Thomas wasn't with them. He was probably scared, probably mourning, probably traumatized, just like the disciples. And he just wasn't there to see with his own eyes that Jesus is raised from the dead. Well, again, so what does he have to do when they're telling him? He has to take their eyewitness into account, just like we do. And in many ways, that puts him just like you and me. And what we have to realize is that the Bible, the New Testament specifically, the Bible's a lot of literary types, right? You got songs in the Psalms. You have Genesis, which is a poetic narrative, not meant to be taken literal, but meant to be taken as true. In other words, God created all things, okay? But he didn't do it like A, B, and C, D. It's not about how he did it. It's that he did it. And the story that he tells us is a poetic way of expressing the narrative. Well, in this case, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, we have eyewitness accounts, historical narrative to tell you who Jesus is, what happened to Jesus, what he's like, and to give account of what they testified to. So this is the difference between those kind of books and this kind of book. So we have many accounts in the Bible that are eyewitness accounts that we can take that evidence and see if it's plausibly true. Okay, now what makes it a miracle, just for you naturalists out there, is that it was a resurrection and it's not supposed to happen. All right? This is what verifies who Jesus is. And this is what verifies that God is real. And God is using that miracle, these eyewitness accounts, to verify what God has done, the meaning of it, and who he is, and then who we are because of it, right? And so here we have it in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John. These accounts are in all of the accounts, right? And they're each telling this story from their perspective to a certain people group. They're writing to a certain people group. And but there's another scripture that happens about 20 years later, another account, I should say. And we talked about this in a previous podcast, but it's 1 Corinthians 15, 3 through 12. And we have this Paul guy who becomes an apostle that was killing Christians, who sees Jesus himself and changes his life, his purpose, his meaning, his value, his significance, everything that he was, and becomes one of the greatest apostles of Jesus Christ, when in fact he started off killing everybody that believed in Jesus Christ. And he has this creed that he speaks of in 1 Corinthians 15:3, and I think it's through 12 or something. But in maybe even longer than that, but in verse 12, Paul says in this creed, when he's talking about the resurrection, he's saying Jesus appeared to over 500 people. So despite appearing to the disciples and the women and other people like James, right? He is appearing to over 500 people. And when he's making this plea through writing this to the Corinthian people, he says something like, hey, if you don't believe me, go ask them. They're still alive, most of them, right? So what am I telling you? That this account of Jesus happened in real time, in history. It was something that people could verify as an eyewitness account. And we have a written eyewitness account, but Thomas had the actual people there to talk to. So it's crazy what happens here, but I want to take it a step further. So the first point I'm trying to establish here is that we have to be able to take this eyewitness account into account in our hearts and go, what's the better explanation for something like Christianity, which has changed the course of the world and still does to this day? And when it gets off from our Christian reality, from our Christian values, from who we are, our Christian identity, as Hulk Hogan was talking about earlier, then everything goes askew in the world. And then we're just left to ourselves, and we're just left to values that we make up, and it just becomes crazy out there, right? And so what we need to do is take this into account. The second thing I want to say is the account is all you need. I want you to notice what Jesus says to Thomas after he allows him to touch his wounds, right? He says, well, you've believed in me because you've seen me, but blessed are those who have not seen me yet and will believe. And so what am I getting at here? Jesus tells him that what you're doing right here is all you need. The book of John goes on to the last verse of the book of John, John 21:25, and he says, this is the written collection of everything that Jesus did. And now there were many other things that Jesus did. Were every one of them to be written down, I suppose the whole world itself could not contain the books that would be written. So what he's telling us is this is all you need to believe, the eyewitness accounts. And Jesus appearing to Thomas is crazy. But it also tells us something a little bit more about Jesus, which is Jesus knows exactly what you need to come into faith. Now, what does that mean? Well, I'm not going to get too far into this because I want to save this for Sunday. But I want you to think about something. For 8 days, Thomas, can you imagine? Okay, put yourself in a room with a bunch of guys and somebody brings out Michael Jordan is the best basketball player ever in the history. He is the GOAT. And then another guy goes, nope, it was Kobe. And then another guy goes, nope. It was LeBron, and then Magic, and then Kareem, and then Larry Bird, and it just goes right on. They start arguing. Well, in this case, he's with his very best friends. He's in this room, and they're going, listen, Jesus appeared to us. He was here. He is risen from the dead. And he's going, nope, I don't believe it. Unless I touch it, I don't believe it. I am not going down that road. I'm not going again. For 8 days, he says to them, unless I put my finger in his hands, unless I place my hand on his side where they pierced him, I will never believe that. For 8 days. And then what does Jesus do? He shows up in the midst of them 8 days later, and he says, hey, Thomas. Now listen, Jesus could have done anything. He could have started a church. He could have got a worship team together. He could have went out and did whatever. He could have done 100 more miracles, right? But he chose to use discipleship that's a whole other thing, but he chose to use discipleship as a way to bring the gospel again to the world. He wanted to use man, okay? And so Jesus, he wants to restore Thomas as his apostle, okay? And Jesus goes directly to him and he says, listen, Thomas, why don't you come here and put your finger right here on my hands? See those holes? I want you to touch them. Why don't you put your hand on my side? I want you to touch it. Flesh. Jesus rose in the flesh. John later talks about that's what I've seen, that which I've touched. They've seen this. They're watching this. And why is that important? Because for 8 days, he's saying, unless I see it, unless I touch it, I ain't believing. And here comes Jesus going, okay, here I am. And what does he say? My Lord, this is what Thomas says to Jesus, my Lord and my God. You see, this was written down for you and me. This was written down so that we can put it in perspective as the good news that it really is. And here's the last point I want to make. How is this resurrection, this thing that we're celebrating traditionally, and we should, how is this affecting your life now? How does the resurrection affect what you believe now? I can tell you, I had cancer 10 years ago. I lost this eye right here to cancer, something that was traumatic, something that I kept my faith through, but I also questioned my faith through, and I'm like, where's God? And through the experience, I believe God revealed himself and his love in greater capacities and ways than I ever truly appreciated. And I will never know how to thank him for that. But it's easy, the further I get away from that experience, to take Jesus for granted, to live for the things I decide are valuable, to live for the things that I decide that are important, to think that it's about me trying to get to heaven when in fact Jesus came to us to make a way. There's so many times when I just don't take the resurrection seriously. There's so many times when I don't live like it's true. There's so many times when I don't proclaim it like this is awesome news. And I don't want my life to be a series of days that I celebrated something like a birthday. You know what I mean? Like, if this is true, what are the implications on our lives? And that's the impact Christianity, Christ, Jesus, the living Savior, has on each one of us. He's not dead. He's not dead. He's not not present in this situation. He's not far away. He's not forgetful of what we're going through right now. And I want to encourage you that whatever traumatic experience you have, to know that it's through that traumatic experience that we find God. Thomas found Jesus on the other side of that cross, a horrifying display of justice or injustice, however you look at it. And I want to encourage you that when we're trying to move from our doubt to faith, we have to be able to, this is why reading the New Testament is so important. We have to look at the eyewitness account, immerse ourselves in it, and allow it to saturate into our hearts and our thinking, and then use our natural logic and go, is this plausible? Is this the best plausible explanation for this? Why has this made such a big impact in the world? And why am I in a crisis of faith when the facts are before me? So I encourage you in this day to, you're like Thomas, and I think there's a lot of us are, that recognize that he was like you. He needed the eyewitness account, and then he needed Jesus to find him. And then he needed Jesus to restore him, and that's what the whole thing's about. So I want to encourage you in this time of Easter to reflect on the Thomas in you and on the traumatic experiences that you thought would be horrifying, that actually God is going to turn around and bring life to in this situation, in this time, and in your life. All right, I'm going to leave it there because I don't want to go on forever, but I just thought that was really good stuff. Hey, listen, on the other side of this, Sunday, we will be having Under the Roof special Easter kind of a show going on. I want to encourage you to take a listen. If you have a family, gather around with the family and listen to it. I think it'll be fantastic. And there'll be a story in there for the kids, and I'm going to give a quick 10-minute sermon. And I think it'll be just great to encourage you, to keep you in faith, and to keep us reflecting on all that God has done for us. Hey, I love you guys. You guys are amazing. And I just want to encourage you right now. I'm looking over here to find something to just stay in faith. This is John Pappas for InferenceSwap.com and for Table Talk. I'll see you in the next show. Love you guys.